Hey guys, thanks so much for coming back. Today we're going to be talking about how to shoot in manual. Now this is kind of an introductory course, if you will, into how to shooting in manual, what your actual camera settings will do when you actually select it, because it can be overwhelming, especially when you're new to photography. If you just got a DSLR and you have no clue how to actually set everything up. Like, we'll talk about what exactly an f-stop is. We're going to talk about shutter speed, when to actually use the appropriate shutter speed, as well as, when to actually set up your ISO. So we'll get into that, and I'll show you on my camera. Now, I am using a Sony A7 Mark II. This camera is a mirrorless camera, so a lot of the things that you're going to see are going to reflect that. So remember, it is a full frame mirrorless camera. So we'll get into that here right now. Thank you guys. Hey guys, so as you can see right here, this is my Sony A7 Mark II, which is just the body by itself, and this is my 28-70 lens. Now, a lot of these cameras, if you're using a DSLR, will have a detachable lens, so we're just going to go ahead and put that on right now. I'm also using a CPL filter with this. Alright guys, so we're going to go ahead and talk about shutter speed first. Shutter speed is a big one. Now, shutter speed can increase a lot of motion blur when you have a lower shutter speed and you're using it for capturing a high motion object. So for example, rollers, if you have a shutter speed of anywhere below 1/100th and you are in a chase car and you're using that for rollers, you'll have that motion that comes with that blur, and you can go ahead and kind of interact with that object and be able to see like the actual movement, and it gives the picture a little bit more life. Now, a higher shutter speed will be used for sports and stuff like that as well, so just keep that in mind when we're actually, if you want to have a higher fidelity or a higher crispy photo, you want to have that higher shutter speed. Now, you can combat that with f-stop. So f-stop is the actual aperture, and it allows the amount of light to come into the camera. So the f-stop, if you want to lower it, that means the amount of light comes in is the maximum amount that you can. And each lens has a different f-stop. So especially with a variable zoom lens, each f-stop changes by the actual adjustment on your zoom. So as you go and zoom in, the higher f-stop will increase. As you zoom out and I get a wider photo, you'll actually have a lower f-stop. So just remember that when you're actually taking these photos, you can combat your shutter speed with an f-stop, and especially if you have a long exposure, you want to bump that f-stop a little bit up so that way you can decrease the amount of light that comes in, and I do that a lot when I do my light painting. Alright, so let's talk about ISO. So ISO is going to essentially have a higher grain amount to the photo. You're inputting noise into the photo to combat darkness. So it's the camera's way to balance out a dark photo. It's its own night vision, essentially. So if you ever want to get a sharp photo at night or something like that, you can always do a long exposure, but if you're doing astrophotography, you'll have tracing with the stars and everything like that, so you do want to have to bump up that ISO, and you can smooth it out in post. Alright, so we're going to talk about autofocus versus manual focus and which time to use it. So if you're using a autofocus for essentially just regular shooting or anything like that, nothing, if you have it like handheld camera or anything like that, you definitely want to use an autofocus. That's what I use all the time, and I'll use continuous autofocus on my camera just to be able to do these things. So it keeps it a little bit easier for you guys, and just keep that in mind when going forward. Now, manual focus will come in handy, especially when you're doing a long exposure, or if you're doing a stationary photo. So if like you're taking a photo of an object and you don't want to go ahead and send anything else up, you can go ahead and keep that manual focus on your subject matter, so it keeps it from essentially coming out of focus or anything like that. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you're using autofocus versus manual focus. So white balance is pretty important, but a lot of people will run with auto, and you can be totally okay with that. But just remember that each time you use white balance, it's going to have a different feel to each photo. The lighting is going to be a little bit different. The way that you actually do the photo photo and the actual way it comes out, the tones, the hues, everything like that changes when you change up the white balance. So the camera will do its best to assume what lighting condition that it's in, but if you use a filter, like I'm using a CPL filter here, it might think that it's shady when it's not, and then offset the white balance. So you can go ahead and set that up manually and change it however you'd like. So just keep that in mind when you're going with auto white balance and you're using filters or anything like that. Now, focus area is just essentially where you want to set up your focus on your camera. Now, as I said, in autofocus versus manual focus, it's something that, you know, if you have your subject matter up in your top left and you're using autofocus, you can keep your meter up there so it just focuses on that. So just keep that in mind when you're actually going forward. You have your actual focusing square, ring, anything like that, or if you have continuous autofocus on and then it's got smart autofocus. Yeah, just keep that in mind. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you haven't already, ring that bell. It means a lot to me. And if you guys have seen something in the video that you have more questions about, comment that down below and I'll get to you guys. I promise. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Remember to stay creative and have a good one. Later, guys.
What's that?